Hello, and welcome to Shepack Unleashed. I'm one of your hosts, Tania.
I'm Nicohle. Welcome to your weekly dose of candid discussion and the pursuit of finding your tribe in this journey of motherhood, womanhood, and sisterhood.
I'm Ashley. Join us as we leave no stone unturned. In each episode, we have heart-to-heart conversations that aim to challenge and empower one another.
I'm Jenny. No more waiting. Shepack Unleashed begins now.
On this week's episode, Beyond the Stigma, honoring the journey of pregnancy loss. So we want to start out this week with a trigger warning. This is a sensitive topic that could be hard for some people to listen to, and so we will not mind at all if this is one that you need to skip. But we are going to be talking about miscarriages and various ways that those can present, and so we want to make sure that you are comfortable listening. We obviously have a guest with us today. We have Jenna joining us. Thank you so much for filling in while Ashley is traveling. And Jenny and Jenna were roommates way back when, correct?
That's right.
J squared.
Well, and when we were roommates, we kept on calling each other the wrong name. Like I would call her Jenny and she would call me Jenna because our brains just couldn't compute.
You didn't know your name?
We knew that, but when you have one thing you've heard so much of your life, your brain will like fill it in with what you know. So we started calling each other rooms just to simplify it.
Love
so if you hear me call her, she's my rooms.
Yeah, we've already heard it many times. So it's definitely going to happen.
It's going to happen. So we lived
Everyone
together.
will be in the loop.
When I first moved to North Carolina for a while until I got engaged.
Yeah? I
Yeah.
don't even know how long ago that was now.
It was a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like 15 years?
It was like 2000.
2009? I had just moved back from Atlanta.
It might
and
have been earlier than that. I don't know when you moved back. It was then because you had
2009.
just moved back and you were starting to look for a house. I owned a townhouse and I was looking for a roommate. We met at a party in Chapel Hill. And it was like, somehow it came up. She was like, I like horses. And I was like, I like horses. And she was like, I want to ride again. And I was like, I want to ride again. Let's find. And we signed up for like a group lesson together.
And then moved in?
And then moved in together.
So like you didn't know each other. One of you could have been a serial killer.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, we did meet
I mean,
through
it's
like
true.
a mutual friend.
So my husband's dance partner at the time, Mia, was in the same friend group as some of Jenna's high school friends.
Listen, after our Taylor Swift debacle, I don't trust any of your husband's dance friends.
We almost got scammed for Taylor Swift tickets online by someone who took over.
And I was ready to send that money.
And I was like, time out. This Zelle seems suspicious.
Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have
Yeah.
cells.
So Jenna was not a stalker. No, we ended up being roommates for a while. And yeah, we've been friends for a really long time.
Yeah.
And you live right down the street from Nicohle.
yeah.
Yeah. Same neighborhood.
Small world.
You
Yeah.
should come to our book club.
I was listening to the segment as an outsider and just really digging the sound of it. Right up my alley.
Perfect.
If we're going to do a book club, sounds very fitting.
You're welcome. It's really fun. I'll just pick you up on the way.
Perfect.
Well, we wanted to address this topic. Obviously, it's a little bit heavier hitting, right? But it's something where all four of us have differing levels of experience with pregnancy loss and miscarriage. And we feel that it's really important to put this kind of information out there for people to help break down the barriers, the stigma that women feel around this idea of a miscarriage. It feels like a topic that for a very, very long time and still today is not acceptable to talk about. It's not acceptable to acknowledge, and that is unacceptable, right?
When people don't announce their pregnancy because they're so worried about miscarrying and then having to like backtrack it because they want to do it in secret. Like
Yeah, there's so much that comes along with the journey of losing a pregnancy. And I think that's what we want to kind of share today and give an opportunity for people to hear what those experiences can be for anyone who maybe has not become pregnant yet, who is trying to become pregnant. There are things that are really beneficial to know going in that many of us were not told any of these things. And so that's kind of where we're coming from today.
And I think it's more common than people realize. They just don't speak about it.
Absolutely. So we wanted to share a few statistics to at least get us started so that our listeners can hear a little bit more about the prevalence of this. Approximately 20% of known pregnancies end in miscarriage. The risk of miscarriage increases with maternal age. We've heard that certainly often enough. Women under 35, the risk is typically about 10 to 15%. That risk rises to about 20% for women aged 35 to 39, and then further increases for women over 40. But obviously in today's world, so many women are choosing to have pregnancies well into 40s.
I was going to say that seems
do.
so
Yeah.
high
Seem
for
really
like
high.
35. Like, what is it? You're going to be 20 and get pregnant?
Yeah. Most miscarriages occur within the first trimester. Majority happen in the first 12 weeks, obviously. The risk decreases significantly after the first trimester, but of course, it is still possible at any point in a pregnancy. Recurrent miscarriages is defined as 3 or more consecutive pregnancy losses, and that affects about 1 to 2% of couples that are trying to conceive. And of course, various factors play a part in the increased risk of miscarriage. That can be anything from chromosomal abnormalities, maternal health conditions, lifestyle factors, certain medications, environmental factors. The list goes on. And so there's no one thing that can help to predict this or to help you avoid it necessarily, but at least talking about it, we hope, can prepare women a little bit better and hopefully help them to find a community if they are experiencing this, to at least give them the confidence to reach out to somebody, to know what questions to ask, anything like that.
Yeah, I hate the name miscarriage because I feel like it just implies, like in the structure of the word, that the woman miscarried, like the woman did something wrong, where almost entirely it's not the woman's fault.
Mm-hmm.
That has been really tough for me to process. And Tania, I think you're the only one on the podcast today that hasn't had some experience in this category.
To my knowledge, I never did experience a pregnancy loss. We were very, very fortunate in our pregnancy journey that it happened relatively smoothly. I have one child and we stopped after that. We were done. But I know that the women in my family, my mom and other women, have experienced it. So I've had sort of peripheral conversations about it, at least within my family, and then certainly many, many friends.
And I'd say, like, I didn't miscarry in the sense of, like, I was pregnant and, like, was unpregnant. I had a chemical miscarriage or a chemical pregnancy, which
And
basically...
this is a new term to me.
Yeah, I had never heard of that. I knew that there were types of miscarriages and they vary in, like, severity and, like, medical intervention needed, but that term is new. So yeah, tell us.
Yeah, so a chemical pregnancy is essentially when your body releases the egg and then the sperm hits the egg and it comes into you, but like doesn't actually ever, and it like raises your levels of HCG or HGC. What is it? HCG raises your level so that you will show up. You'll like miss your period and show up as pregnant, but it doesn't actually ever like take
on a pregnancy test. Positive.
So I tested positive like 4 or 5 weeks after I was supposed to miss my period. And then made my appointment to my OBGYN for the 6-week appointment. Because at that time, they were doing it at 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And then I had some like spotting and bleeding. But when I called, they were like, it's probably implantation bleeding. I was going to say it's the wrong words. I was like, like, what is that again?
I got you.
Implantation. I want to say implementation. Corporate girly over here.
Corporate hits hard.
And then when I went in for the ultrasound, they're like, there's no pregnancy here. And my HCG levels were basically at 0 at that point. Mm. So I never actually was pregnant, but just showed pregnancy. That's what they call like a chemical pregnancy.
Can I ask questions about like, was that early in your pregnancy journey? Like,
it was actually between Evan and Cole. Okay. So I had Evan, I had been on birth control for like 10 plus years. Yeah. Got off it and got pregnant with Evan within the year of being off birth control. And then I never went back on birth control after, between my 2 kids, which was like 3 years in between. And I just did like what is the method called where you just
rhythm method,
where you just like know your cycle?
Rhythm method.
Pull and pray.
Well, I mean, yes,
the rhythm method.
But like once I learned what ovulation was, like this was also stuff I didn't really know. Like I didn't know that ovulation, what it felt like, or I didn't know like what your mucus is supposed to look like.
No, we just learned to not get pregnant. Right. That's what we're taught.
Right. And so once I learned those things, I could tell the signs very quickly of like the weeks of like to be on and off. And like, especially if I wanted sex, I was like, nope, don't have sex with me this week. I want to have sex. That means the baby is trying to happen. This is not a good week. My hormones are pressing this one.
Okay.
And so it was between the two. And so it wasn't like I wasn't not trying, but I wasn't trying actively either.
Okay.
And it would have been, I was like a year after Evan was born. So it was for sure too like early in my brain to be pregnant.
For you guys, you wanted
I was like, I hadn't really even gotten my like period back fully because I was breastfeeding up that year. And I was like, you can't really get pregnant while you're breastfeeding.
False news.
Nice.
I mean, yeah, false news, but like didn't know that was false news. Like thought that was true.
So what symptom did you have? Like you got a pregnancy test. You thought you were pregnant. Then how did you figure out it was like that 6-week ultrasound?
Yeah, it was when I went to the ultrasound.
And then what happened? Like, was there a treatment you needed to do?
No,
or,
they were
like,
basically like,
guidance
there's
they gave you?
nothing there. Like, and because I was still just breastfeeding, I was still very like spotty and light. Like I wasn't really having a full period. And so they're like, this was a chemical pregnancy. Your levels went up and they went back down because my levels were even really low. Like they could tell that there was some traces.
By the time you were there,
by the time I was there, they were low again, but there was trace amounts. So they could tell like, yes, you had what we call a chemical pregnancy. I was like, oh, like
how was that for you? Showing up to the 6-week ultrasound,
thinking
and then
you're
telling
pregnant.
You,
yeah. I mean, I actually did not like. I was a little relieved.
That's fair. That's okay.
Yeah. Like I was actually, because I was like a year out and I was struggling with like just managing myself, that I was like, oh God, I'm not ready to do this again. And I hated being pregnant. Like hated being pregnant. I am not one of those girls that was like, I loved it and I was glowing. And like, no, I was sick. I threw up the whole time. I couldn't sleep. I was uncomfortable. I hated it so much. And I was only going to do it for like the first time I didn't know I would hate it. And the second time I only did it for my first child to not be an only child. Like I did it only for him, not for me. Like honestly, that was like my whole rationale about doing it again. But like I was actually like, oh, okay, cool. This is I didn't have like any bad feelings about it. I didn't feel bad
like
about
hormonal and crying.
No, I
What about
wasn't.
Steve?
He was like not really like fazed by it either.
Okay.
Like I don't think we had the same sort of like traditional, because it was like so soon. Like
Yeah, you didn't have time to get excited about the
soon.
idea.
And I wasn't excited. I was kind of like, shit.
You were going to figure it out. Yeah.
I was going to figure it out, but I was also kind of like, shit. Like I'm not ready for that. So I don't think I had the same reaction that I hear stories about women having from miscarriages. And I sort of felt some guilt about that. Like,
That's fair.
oh, I don't feel bad about it, or I'm not sad about it. Like I didn't even really tell anybody about it.
Just by even the way you said it today,
Yeah.
you can see like you feel uncomfortable being like, I felt a little relief.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That is okay.
Yeah,
Right.
but
There
it's
are
not
plenty of
traditionally
women
the
who would identify
way
with that too
you
and would be
hear.
afraid to talk about it.
Yeah. And it's not the way you hear it. I was like, okay. And I didn't like have any, like, I was like nonchalant about it, honestly, because I was like, that happens. But I will tell you, the second time I did get actually pregnant, I like peed on a stick every week because I was like,
scared.
so I was like, oh, well, like up until that appointment, like it could just like disappear.
There's
like,
such a ripple effect.
Yeah. So I like literally took a pee test like every other day, if not every day, honestly.
All right. So, Jenny, you had a little bit different experience, certainly. Do you want to share yours or also maybe talk to us about the types of miscarriages?
Yes. I'm not sure that I will get all the terminology correct, but I know it's considered a complete miscarriage, which is what I had, when essentially, like, for whatever reason, the pregnancy is not viable and your body takes care of it naturally. So it was certainly emotionally difficult and like a lot to go through, but I didn't have to go into the doctor for them to like clean up shop. Like, I don't know the right
Are those
word.
kind of the
Clean up
stories where
shop.
like
There
will go to
yeah.
the bathroom and then suddenly realize like,
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
But there are plenty of stories where like you kind of like Nicohle, you show up to the appointment and something is wrong. Maybe the baby doesn't have a heartbeat anymore, but they can still see it on the ultrasound. And they're like, oh, your body might take care of it. And if it doesn't, right, then you have choices to make. There's a
DNC,
yeah.
which is like surgical,
which is an abortion.
Yeah.
Yep. And then there's like a medical pill you can take and experience at home. So I'm sure we'll talk about that later. I didn't experience that, but we did have a pregnancy also between my oldest and my youngest. I was very excited about it. My due date was actually my birthday.
And that made you excited?
I had mixed feelings about
Okay.
it, but like it's certainly like I think if it probably wasn't, I probably would have forgotten by now. But now every year I'm always like, oh, if I had that, like, I'm sorry, I'm going to cry. On my birthday, I'm always like, oh, if I had that baby, like, how old would they be?
Yeah.
So it's like just kind of tied in my brain in that way. So we were definitely excited. And we were at Disney World, actually. And we had already taken like the Christmas before. Like, I had these shirts. You'll see the pictures now. If you look back, there was like a mama bear shirt and a papa bear and like a little bear and a baby bear. And so we're all in like our bear shirts taking pictures. And then I took like cute pictures with like the baby bear shirt that I was going to like post later.
But you had not
posted, but I was like ready.
How far along were you when you took those photos?
Early.
Yeah.
Like, really early. And then I was at Disney World and I just like started bleeding like a ton, like the heaviest period you've ever. It wasn't like I was going to the bathroom and really like, but you know, you do what you got to do. And I was like at so.
Isn't that also sad that like women's health, that you're like, oh, I'm just bleeding excruciatingly and I'll just like truck on.
Yep. Yeah. So I ended up going to the doctor and they basically said, it was a complete miscarriage. We don't necessarily know why, but there's nothing like left that we have to go in for. And so for that, I was grateful. I think that would have compounded like having to make a decision in that moment. Like, I can't even imagine the many women that have to go through that, especially with what's going on, you know, in our country right now with medical rights. Like you, Tania, I know a lot of women in my life who this has happened to, some of whom had to go in and get support for their health so they don't get septic. And now like to have to go through picket lines or have to go to a different state to get the care they need so they literally don't die. Like, I can't even imagine. I could hardly like function. I was in such a haze and so sad.
Well, I think it's important we use the proper language when we're talking about it, because when you said DNC or medical pill, those are both abortion legally. And the fact that like when people are talking about abortions, they're thinking about actually going and just like terminating a pregnancy. But these medical interventions, such as the pill, such as a DNC, are technical abortions and are being banned right now.
Yeah. And that would have been really tough. Like, just to be really clear, I believe in choice for women, full stop. I believe that this decision is between a woman and her doctor, and they know what is best, full stop. For me personally, I've always been very firm in my belief that I wouldn't choose to do that.
Yeah.
And so if I would have had to been forced to make that choice, I don't know what I would have done. Like, I am really grateful that my body did what it did and that I wasn't put in that situation, because I cannot even imagine like how difficult
to have like a DNC if you needed.
Plus, you're like in the office with like baby pictures on the wall and like super pregnant women who are like, when's your due date? Like, it's just like not.
I've heard people express like such a strong desire to have a separate waiting room.
I just saw that TikTok also.
Like, you know, doctors' offices have like a healthy room and a sick room. Like, for OBGYN offices to have a smaller room where someone could go, where they don't need to be sitting right next to all these very pregnant women and people who are happy and people who try to strike up a conversation and say, how far along are you? Right? Like, these very well-meaning conversations that happen, or just the visual reminder that like, I'm here because I don't have that, right? Like, or I can't right now in that moment, you know, and it's something that I wish more doctors' offices would take to heart and to implement.
And they weren't mean, but they weren't particularly empathetic either. And maybe the folks that see this every day, I can imagine, might get desensitized to it to varying degrees. Like, I feel like the woman who did the ultrasound was like the nicest of, you know, but it just definitely made me reflect on, like, I never asked someone if they're pregnant or trying, because somebody was like, I'll never forget, somebody at work literally asked me, like, are you trying for your second? While I was still in the, like, a miscarriage isn't like wham, bam, it's done. Like, it's not like a second and it's over. Like, I was actively, heavily bleeding and cramping for a while. And I'll never forget that woman. I mean, she didn't mean anything, but when are you going to try for your second? Your son's so cute. And I didn't have the heart to be like, actually, I'm like literally having a miscarriage right now.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I hope one day soon. Like, so I've definitely learned to not ask. And I also learned that I wish I would have told people sooner. Like, I know people often hold the news until 12 weeks because that's when it feels safe. But I wish people knew, because I needed people to know. Like, I had to tell my boss. I'll never forget. She like basically was like, take the week off. And she sent me like a smoothie gift card and like a sweatshirt that was like, I don't want to talk to anyone but my horse. Like, she was so sweet about it. But yeah, that's really my 2 takeaways is like not to ask others about their, you know, decision or not to have children or where they are, because you never know. And yeah, that if I got pregnant again, I would tell people sooner, which I did with Luna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jenna, you are our guest here on this topic. And so we'd love to hear about like your personal story on this.
Yeah. So mine was a little bit different. I actually had an ectopic pregnancy. So from what I understand, it's actually one of the more rare versions of miscarrying. This was my first. My husband and I like, we're tiptoeing around it. Like, should we go down this path? Is it the best for us? But with my age, we kind of felt like it was kind of now or never. So we tried for a couple months. And right when we were kind of like, is this the right path for us? I took a pregnancy test and found out I was pregnant. But it was interesting timing because that same night, I started heavily bleeding. And I was like, something doesn't feel right about this. So we were able to get an appointment literally the next morning just because something seemed uncomfortable or off about it. And everything showed that I was definitely pregnant, like blood test, urine test, everything. But they couldn't find anything on the ultrasound, which they said wasn't abnormal because of the
early.
time. They said it was very early.
That could almost look like a chemical pregnancy, right? Either be early or like your body's chemically pregnant, but there's nothing there.
Yep. So like I had an HCG level, but it was still low. So they were like, something is going on. We just can't tell. So they recommended that I follow up with my regular OB the next week because I couldn't get in with my regular one that so quickly. So I was like, okay, we'll just figure it out. And over the weekend, things got worse. My husband and I ended up going to the ER on that the Sunday after the Friday. And my HCG level had dropped enough where they were like, okay, you're miscarrying. Probably. That's what we would anticipate from, because I knew my numbers enough to tell them what had been like shown on Friday. They were like, okay, we're sorry. And at this point I was like, okay, I just like kind of want this to be over.
And this was at the ER.
This was at the ER on a Sunday. So our appointment had been the Friday before. This was Sunday. So 2 days later. And then they were like, follow up with your OB. So finally on Tuesday, I go to my regular OB, have my like 3rd ultrasound in, 5 days. And I'm still new to this. So I'm like, oh my God, this is a lot to handle. Like it's invasive. And at that point, it was almost starting to get painful because I was getting sore. And
they're like, as for the listeners, the early ultrasounds are not just like the ones you think of where they're gelling on your belly and like looking. These are like vaginal ultrasounds.
And they dig when they are looking for something to just figure out what is going on with you. And so like by this point, like I was just feeling sore. I was feeling irritated. I'm bleeding profusely, like sorry to say it out loud, but it was happening. And that's what I was going through. I mean, at this point, I just wanted everything to be over. And so they were like, okay, like HCG levels are back again. And I'm like, okay, what is happening now? And they still didn't see anything. She said, there's this little dot, and it's higher than we like, but again, it's a dot. It can be a number of things floating in your system.
Higher meaning it was higher in your body?
Yeah.
Like not in the uterus?
Possibly not in the uterus. Okay. And they had already, obviously we knew this thing was like probably not, I call it a thing because at that point in time, I had just been through so much that I was so aggravated. Like I never want to take away from pregnancy terms or calling something a baby. But at this point, like as soon as we found out we were pregnant, it was gone.
Yeah. Like that was your reality though, right? So it's important to like honor that that's what
and everyone
you were
copes
feeling
in different ways.
Well, I think also that you kind of have to detach, like
to
keep yourself emotionally functioning.
Yeah. I think I was just like so fried that week that like I detached from all of it and I was just like, get it done, get it over with. Like, what do we have to do at this point?
Yeah.
That was my like
you were
reaction.
in pain too.
I was having severe cramping. Like it just, and nobody could give me anything or say anything that was like comforting or tell me when it was going to end. So that was on a Tuesday. And they were like, another thing that kind of came up was my blood type was a concern, apparently. Nobody
Are you negative blood type?
I am a negative blood type.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about
Do you
that.
know that even when I had talked about potentially trying to get pregnant and had my IUD removed, nobody said anything.
Yeah.
What does this mean? I don't understand.
Okay, so my sister is a negative blood type. And so when she got pregnant, her baby was a different blood type than her. And so your body can start attacking the baby because it's a different blood type.
Considers it non-compatible.
Positive versus negative.
Positive versus negative. And it also can trigger that like itching condition where your liver enzymes are like so high. So she had to get like shots every month for it. And like then she got the itching condition where they had to deliver her at 37 weeks because of the fact that like she was profusely like itching. Her like blood itched.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the mother is, sorry, this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but a good teachable moment too. If the mother is a negative blood type, is it only if the baby is a positive blood type that you'll experience those symptoms?
If the father is a positive blood type, the likelihood that you have, they don't know. So they preemptively will give you the like shots because they don't know what blood type the baby will be.
Is positive more dominant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Negative is rare. Not if people have it rare.
Then if a mother is a positive blood type, she could have a baby with a negative.
I don't know how the science works, but like one of them have to be negative in order to have.
Like I think one of my parents is negative and one's positive. And I'm the only one out of my siblings too that is a negative.
It's like a recessive trait, right?
Yeah.
The non-dominant one.
Yeah. And it's rare. Like not a lot of people are negative blood type.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
So, no, that's okay.
Down the rabbit hole.
We needed to because again, this was something that was never verbalized to me. And I've known my blood type for a long time because I'm negative and I'm a universal donor. And it's like, it's something that like, it's sought after. So like it just like,
how ironic that you can be a universal donor.
A universal donor or like negative blood type. And I had no idea about this until
it could cause big pregnancy issues.
I bet is Landon negative too?
I have no idea.
It's so like, this was just one of those.
This was not a conversation.
Right? And it wasn't until I went to they talked to me about it at the ER. They were like, oh, by the way, we like typed your blood. And I was like, well, I could have told you I was negative. And they were like, yeah, there's this vaccine that you should probably get and they started going down the rabbit hole.
And you'd have to take that every month while you're pregnant.
Yep. And I'm sitting there going, you just told me that I'm probably miscarrying, but now you're going down the rabbit hole of like this vaccine. And I couldn't process at this point. I had been sitting in an ER for like 7 hours. So then when I went to my OB, they talked about it in more detail. And I ended up getting a very uncomfortable vaccine in my butt of all things.
It's in your butt?
Yeah, every month.
And it does not feel good.
No.
And I'm like, so all things that I wanted to do that day after.
Salt in the wound.
They did that just in case. Like it was early.
Because even if we were to try again, I would have had to go down this road again. So at least they were kind of getting ahead of anything.
Okay.
So that was an interesting day too. So they were like, we're just going to just keep going. And
this was Tuesday.
Okay. And they were like, we're just, keep an eye on it. They were like, if you start having pain on your upper right side and you keep bleeding, like, something's wrong. So
why upper right?
Because that's where
your tubes like your fallopian tubes are up a little bit higher, and the dot that they saw on me was on my right side.
Okay.
Because you ovulate out of one side at a time. So like that's the side that probably ovulated, and that's where
I did learn that when I went through this. Yeah.
So that's where it could possibly be stuck if it were ectopic. So I was fine Wednesday and Thursday, like still cramping, still bleeding, but like that's what they told me to kind of expect.
What was your pain level at this point, like out of 10?
Out of 10, I would probably say just like uncomfortable, like 3, 4. Like, I was functioning.
But that would like cripple a man. It's just because you're
like we're not talking about man pain level here. We're talking about real pain level.
But if it's like akin to like period pain, right? We are conditioned from a very early age that you just power through that shit.
Yeah.
And like no one cares that you are uncomfortable. Like you still
you pop some ibuprofen and you keep going. And really like the person that I think I opened up to about it first was my boss at work, because I was like, I just need you to know that like things aren't good this week. And she was the most supportive, like there for me person that week.
Well, it's interesting because you have a female boss then, right?
Yes. And she had her first, like at the very start of COVID. So like she had announced her pregnancy when we were actually on a business trip together.
Okay.
So, she was wonderful about it. It was just like that constant camaraderie. Like, I love my job. I've always loved my boss and had a lot of respect for her. So for her to be there for me that week, as I'm like, I don't know what's happening, like, because I couldn't be my best self at work.
Yeah.
At all. So Wednesday and Thursday kind of like floated by and no change in anything. So I was like, okay, cool. Well, maybe it's just subsiding at this point. And I woke up Friday and something felt very, wrong. The cramps had intensified. Like I was sitting in my chair, just like doing everything to like not move in my like abdominal area. And I just remember thinking like, this feels again different in some way than I haven't felt before. And I was like, okay, maybe this is just like the final stage of it. But I sat there all day. I worked all day. And I just like, because nobody really, other than like the high right side, nobody really told me what to expect or like conditions, like what could happen.
Yep.
And I was like, well, I think I don't know. Like if I'm trying to think really hard, I think I feel a little dull thing.
Well, and then when somebody tells you like, if you have pain in this area, let us know. And you're like, of course I have pain in this area. This is where the area of pain is. Like it's in my brain. Like where else am I going to have it?
So that was Friday and I was like, okay. And it was, Friday at 5, I called the on-call OB from my practice. And it just so happened to be a reciprocating practice, not my actual office. And at that time, like I'm living out here in Chapel Hill and I never changed all of my doctors over. So everything is still in Raleigh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, how does this even look with everything? And she was like, needless to say, very unhelpful. It did not make me feel any sort of uncomfortable. Like I was able to give her all my levels, give her the entire detail. And she was like,
had like all the information.
I had everything. Like, and she was like, yeah, that maybe sounds like you should probably be seen. But and I was like, but what do you mean? But you don't know. Like, it just was very discomforting to be like, okay, well, this is like tripled in pain.
She was dismissing you, essentially.
It just didn't feel good. Like I didn't feel comfortable after talking to her that everything was okay and that I could just like go about my night. So I told my husband, I was like, I'm going to go take a shower.
On a Friday evening too.
Yeah,
of course. Always the weekend.
It's always a Friday night.
It is. But there is something to that of like, you go to the appointment and they're just very non-committal. And I get it. But it's like, because I ended up having to do like special testing to figure out why I miscarried. And we realized that I have a blood clotting predisposition. I have to be on blood thinners, blah, blah, blah.
Is that the first time you realized that?
No, that actually happened.
Okay.
I'm going to think about that.
Okay.
But yeah, it came out of it. I learned that through my OB. And, but like, there's so many appointments I can remember with all of my kids where it was just like, we don't really know. Let's just wait and see. Come back in a week. And it's so like
experience also.
There's nothing like black and white about like, this is what's happening to you. This is what you should expect. Like, it's just so frustrating.
Well, and they just don't take women's pain seriously.
Well, and I think there's so much at the beginning. They just don't know. Like, they don't even want to see you till 6 weeks.
But even
like Godspeed.
But
come back
further into my pregnancy, my first pregnancy, when I knew something was wrong at like 40 something weeks, they didn't listen. Like they're so dismissive because they're like, that could be.
I think it's getting better, but you have to really advocate. So I'm really sorry that you're like doubled over in pain on with an OB
and she just didn't
on another Friday night.
And it just like, so I was like, I'm going to take a shower, relax. But I was like, I do think we've got to go in. I was like, something doesn't feel right. So we went to the ER. It was a disaster on a Friday night. I'm like thinking this is horrible. We drove to Rex because at least that way it would be somebody from a reciprocating practice. Obviously, my practice must have thought something of them to like share call and share surgeries and that kind of thing. So we drove over there. I sat in the waiting room for forever. They finally did a blood test and an ultrasound. And sure enough, my HCG had like spiked off the charts. And they were like, they came out, I think, finally at about 11 o'clock. And this is after sitting there since like, we'd gotten there about 5:30, 6 o'clock, sitting there all evening. And they were like, yeah, you were right. It's ectopic. And I was like, yeah, I knew I was right. Like I felt that it was not right in my body. And even then, like I remember they like took me back to a room and started like IV and everything. And I just like asked them if I could like sit there in my own clothes and not get in like a hot, because I wanted to be comfortable as I'm sitting there like bleeding and cramping. And like finally, like nobody offered me anything for the pain, not even like ibuprofen, nothing.
I'm shocked, especially when they knew it was ectopic, because that's supposed to be like.
I'm not shocked because they don't offer like they're like you're supposed to just sit there and like endure.
Well, also like at that point, like it's not viable, so give the girl some drugs.
Yeah, like I know it's coming out. Like let's just like. You gotta, like there's no other way to really like once your fallopian tube bursts, they have to go in.
So did it burst?
Yeah.
And
it
they
was
knew
ruptured.
from the ultrasound that your tube,
because
and they'd be in that chill with you?
Yeah, because they could see that I was bleeding internally and that's where the pain was coming from.
How the hell could your fallopian tube have burst? Your HEC is like up, you're in pain, you're bleeding internally, and they're just like, just chill out here?
And finally I like spoke up because I was like, I realized that they weren't gonna do anything unless like I advocated for myself. And finally I was like, look, like I'm not one to sit here and like ask for pain meds. There's like some kind of stigma around that, another topic, but like I am hurting. And I was like, I have been in this pain since I woke up this morning at 7:30. And I was like, it's getting worse. I can't, like my emotions were to the fact like I just couldn't handle it anymore.
And we are so conditioned as women to be like, I'm sorry, I'm in pain. I need something for it. Like, why are you apologizing to them for being in pain? Give me some fucking drugs and like treat me like I'm a person here.
But in my head, like, I don't know, I watched too much Grey's Anatomy maybe, but like, this is an emergency. Like, act like, run around. Like, we got to put you under and get this out now. You're bleeding internally. Go, go, go. Like,
Yeah,
that is
Grey's
not
Anatomy. That's not reality.
happened.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No,
But
I
that's
sat there.
dangerous. Like, it could kill you.
It can if it gets like undiscovered or got further along. But we caught mine when it had like pretty much had just ruptured that day. And that's why they caught it, because on the ultrasound, they could see that I was bleeding. So like it finally showed something.
Think about how many women just suffer in that pain while they're ruptured and like don't go see anybody because everyone's like, this is normal. You're just miscarrying. It's fine. And nobody has ever had this experience. Like the first time you have it is the first time you've ever experienced it.
Yeah.
So there's no way to know, like,
There's no benchmark. There's
right,
no
that this
comparison.
is normal or this is not normal. It's just like, this is like what they're telling me it's all fine. And like, we believe them and just like move on with our lives.
But they have to do surgery, right? Like, there's no other option.
At that point in time, yes, because it becomes like a danger to
Could they have
yourself.
done something before
If it hadn't
it
ruptured?
hadn't ruptured?
I don't, from what I understand, there's actually no like, there are preventative measures they can do if they like figure it out or something beforehand and they can try to intervene, but it's
specifically
not,
for an ectopic.
yeah, for an ectopic,
pregnancy,
but
okay.
apparently it's like almost unheard of.
Yeah.
Like it's by the
Well, yeah,
time
'cause
it
nobody
usually goes,
listened.
Like the Plan B pill, right? Like it just forces your body to shed the uterine lining, and
But if it's not in the uterus,
that is requisite. It is in the uterus,
right.
That's useless for an ectopic situation.
so they had mentioned a few things on my Tuesday appointment, but I was just
But if they
shut
had
down.
ultrasound
Like-
you at Tuesday,
I agree. I feel
near
like
your
they should have caught
fallopian
this.
tubes, and they could see
a speck.
that it was on. Like, but if they had ultrasound outside
Hmm.
and see,
they did both.
right? But like
Mhm.
earlier, right, and seeing that you had an ectopic. I can't even say the word. Ectopic pregnancy. Like, could they have done something before it ruptured at that time?
They said there was a few options, but because they couldn't even figure out that was
It wasn't,
for
like,
sure
confirmed.
the issue, they couldn't confirm it. So there was nothing at
So
that
we do
point.
nothing. We
They-
can't confirm, so we do nothing.
It was
and
pretty
see.
much a wait and see.
Basically a ticking time bomb.
It yes, very well could have been like it was.
And
you know.
nobody said, like, you're a ticking time bomb. Like, please stay alert and be ready to come into the emergency room if you have severe
Well, I
cramping.
think they're conditioned to not cause panic, right? Like you don't want to exacerbate the anxiety and the panic, but obviously like this is a situation where there needed to be more information shared and more caution, right? And just more.
More panic. I wanted more panic.
or even just like
Panic
give me
is
a
not
follow up.
But
But
yeah,
I
like,
wanted
come
more
see me before the
urgency.
weekend. Let's
Yeah.
come in on Thursday and Friday and let's
Yeah,
chat. That like
it's-
seemed appropriate. to
I would
me.
have thought a follow up appointment. Like you see a spec.
Yeah.
Why did you not preemptively say like, hey, I think we should see you on Thursday. Let's check your levels and let's see if the spec has grown.
agreed.
Because by that point, it definitely would have.
Mhm.
Because
they could have caught it before your tube burst.
yeah, and not
So-
guaranteed that they could have done anything different than what I went through, but I wouldn't have sat in pain for a whole
In the ER.
in the ER.
So then what happened? Like, when did you finally get attention from the staff?
Finally, after I asked for some pain management, the guy finally came in and was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry. It's just been a crazy night. Apologize." And he was a nice enough guy. You know, I didn't want to take it
Yeah.
out on him. I knew he was doing the best he can. We all know how staffing is in
ERs are
healthcare.
wild places. Yeah.
Yep. And, you know, I could tell the gentleman next to me was much sicker and much worse off than I was.
But we should not compare our own pain from somebody else because we as women are conditioned to say, well, that person is worse than me. Like, we need to say, like, I don't care if that person's worse than me. We should all be treated like we're in our own pain.
Yeah. So after that, it was just a waiting game, waiting for the surgeon. She was actually in doing another one of these when they discovered mine, which is crazy that it's
So
so
you had to
rare.
have surgery.
I did. That at that point, once it was ruptured, they have to go in and, Usually they can't even save the fallopian tube because it usually is just all.
So does that complicate any future pregnancies?
They said there was absolutely no science behind it. They said they were like, people can go on to be like, have completely healthy pregnancies after this. They said it's just not common enough for them to know what.
Well, if they don't save your
what happens
fallopian,
after.
There's 2 of them.
There's 2.
Well, yeah, I hear you, but like
You would think
I
it's
know.
like 50% less because you're only ovulating every other month then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I would assume so.
So
I
what
mean,
was
based
the
on what they tell
surgery
you.
like?
It was super easy. It was laparoscopic. I was in and out in an hour.
were you awake?
No, I was
Okay.
completely out.
You never know with women's healthcare. I was like, were you awake?
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, finally, I think I went up at like 1:30 or something in the morning, and I remember getting out by like 2:33. By the time they like woke me up, and as soon as they woke me up and got me up, like, I mean, I was swollen, but I didn't. Did
they like send you home?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I
My
was home
God.
by 5:00 in the morning. Because I had finally like told my parents what was happening, and my mom stayed at my house, and I was like, just stay there with our dogs till we can get home. So yeah, I was out of surgery by 2:30 or 3. My father-in-law went and picked up my prescriptions and gave them to my husband, and my husband drove us home, and we like went to bed. Like it was
Laparoscopic surgery?
yeah. So they basically like it's all machine oriented
And needles, like
needle like arms basically. So you have like 3 incisions to like
They're very
lower.
small
Very
incisions,
small.
right?
They're
compared to
like less. I think my biggest one is maybe an inch.
Mhm.
The other 2 like half an inch. There's one that does run down from my belly button, so that's the only one that's like truly visible. But they fill your stomach with gas. I think that was the worst part because they have to be able to see and like maneuver. So they would need your belly like swollen. So all they told me when I left there is, here's your medications for pain. You might feel some shoulder pain because gas rises, even though they try and get the gas like out of you post-surgery, I guess. But like they said I might feel some shoulder pain, but they were like, relatively quick recovery. You should be up. Like, please walk because walking will help the trapped gas like move around. So we went home, went to bed. Like the next day, just was like, I was in some of the worst pain I've ever felt because the gas seemed to have gotten trapped under my rib cages.
Oh.
So it did not make it to my shoulders. So like I actually had to sleep sitting up because I couldn't like move to my sides because and I called again and didn't get any help. They were like, oh, I guess that could be like maybe just some leftover internal bleeding or gas.
Oh.
And I'm like,
Just leftover internal bleeding.
And
no
finally,
big deal.
like, no big deal. At this point in time, my husband and I are like, no more medical. Like, let's give it some time.
I would have had the opposite
I'll
reaction.
walk it
I would be
off.
like, I am camping in the
Well,
hospital.
all I
and
could
gonna
think
make
is you
sure I'm
said you
okay.
guys were on the fence about having kids, and then you have this whole entire like traumatic thing. I'd be like, well, we're not on the fence any longer.
No, we unfortunately were not after that.
Right.
It just like after this experience, I really just needed everything to be done. And the fact that it was just a week of, I guess I don't know if I can cuss, but
You can.
It was pure hell for me.
And that's not a cuss word. Just so
Okay,
you know.
true.
Like I say fuck every other word on this thing.
But yeah, I mean,
agony. I mean, that's
Yeah.
it was like
physical and emotional.
no
agony.
help, no assistance, no follow-ups from anybody.
No
Like
empathy.
you are completely on this island figuring it out. And like, you don't even realize how common it is and how other people are feeling about these things because again, this isn't something we talk about. So I, by happen chance, knew that one of my friends, Jenny, had gone through a miscarriage before, but it wasn't like, this isn't talked about. So
yeah, you didn't know you didn't know what kind of miscarriage she had or how.
No, I
Nothing.
never shared details.
No,
Yeah.
right. Nothing. So I didn't really know, like, I didn't know how to feel after the fact. I didn't know who to talk to. They basically they discharged me from the hospital in the middle of the night. We went home with like, you may have some shoulder pain. No follow-ups, no nothing. It was a ghost.
Your
town
OB
after that.
didn't follow up?
Nothing.
And I wish
Please tell me you have a new OB.
I have since not been back to that practice.
Please tell me you have a
good.
new
And
OB.
I did share my feelings about how I thought I was treated
Good.
by the sistering practice because I didn't feel like that was the best guidance to give anybody.
No.
I didn't, it was bad.
But like I wish I could say that this is like isolated to miscarriages, but this is also the same sort of like nonchalant treatment you get when you're pregnant after you have a baby. They like give you a baby and send you home and you don't even get any follow-up care. 6 weeks postpartum after so this is a very common theme and like women's healthcare, in my opinion, that like it's just so dismissive of like what you're going through and how you're feeling as a
childbirth
whole.
is natural. It just does it.
Oh yeah, it just does it. Like I'd be dead if it just does it.
Yeah. I wish somebody would have taken the time to just say like, hey, if you need, you should probably find somebody to talk to after this, because you don't compute that your body was pregnant and then it's removed. And if you've never gone through pregnancy before, you don't actually understand that there's an aftermath.
Like your hormones are so high and then their hormones crash. And I do remember you ended up telling me through a text message.
Sorry, it wasn't the best.
Again,
after
like, it's okay, because like I'm so glad you told me.
We need to take the I'm sorry just off.
Yeah, like I know the amount of times you've apologized so far. I want to like be like
sorry about.
Yeah,
There's nothing for you to
I didn't tell
apologize
people.
for.
But I didn't tell a lot of people during my miscarriage either, and I wish it was later. And then people are always like, why didn't you tell me? And it's like, I don't know. I was like in the trenches. So I get it. But I remember like calling you later and you're like, you were like really depressed. And I was like, Runes, like this is your hormones crashing. And you're like, what do you mean? It was like your body, like I
had no idea. Nobody had said anything.
Well, and if you've never been pregnant or gone through it, like, how would you even know? Like, you just think, like, maybe I'm just crazy right now.
Yeah. I just, like, one day I was good. The next I was down. And, like, even though my husband and I finally looked at this as, like, an end for us because it had been the worst week, like, we finally were through it. And we were like, oh, my gosh, we're on the other side of this. We're through it. But then I didn't understand because nobody had talked to me. Nobody had told me. Like, I just was sent home and it just was done. And it wasn't like and it's like, after something like that happens, you don't know who to talk to really, like,
because nobody tells you.
Right. Like I have friends and I love all my friends and I treasure them dearly and I usually share everything, but like this was kind of that unknown territory for me. I was so uncharted that I didn't.
Sometimes it
and how do you
reiterates that it's real, too,
right?
Like when you're in the thick of it, sometimes you don't want to acknowledge just how real it is. And that's okay too, right? Like that's a very common coping mechanism. And to a degree, that's how your brain protects you, right? But it shouldn't always be that way.
I also think it has to like the shame, like Jenny was saying, like call it a miscarriage. It's like something the woman has done to make it. And like, it's your body going through all this and everyone's so worried about like the baby and what's happening there that they're not thinking about like what you're actually going through as the
mother is also a human being.
Right. Like that is severely lacking in this country of believing that the mother is also important and her mental and physical health is, in my opinion, more important than the fetus health.
Mm-hmm. It's so sad to me too that they just completely dismissed any sort of follow-up care for you. I would have thought at the end of the day, someone who experienced what you did after having a surgery, they would be like, okay, we're going to go ahead and put a follow-up on the books for you in 3 days, whatever, right? Like, why
do you believe that to be what you would assume? Like, I'm struggling.
I have had other surgeries in my life where that was the norm. That was the protocol.
Or you get a call the next day from a doctor that says, how's your post-operative care? Like, are you having any side effects?
Yeah.
And I could have been like, yes, why can't I sleep on my side? And why is it under my, I would have asked these questions.
I've had a small handful of surgeries and procedures in my life, and I did have those follow-up things scheduled, but they were not related to maternal health.
Right. So I'm thinking about the fact that I had 2 C-sections.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And post those C-sections, I feel like I got 0 follow-up and support. They nicked my bladder in the second C-section. And there was no follow-up. Like they told me they nicked it, but they fixed it. But there was no follow-up of like, hey, have we ever checked your bladder again to make sure that like whatever stitch like we put in is there? Like to this day, I don't even know. Like never followed up. It was basically like all about the baby and not about the fact that I had major abdominal surgery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And all these things happen. So like, I am not surprised by this, which is terrible.
I'm horrified.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't until like, I think after talking to Jenny, I was like, oh,
she was like, you need to call and make a follow-up appointment. And I was like, what am I supposed to tell them? Like because it wasn't even my practice. So I remember calling and they were like, okay, so what do you need to be seen for? And I just remember being like, well, I had this surgery and they told me that eventually like
stitches?
Like follow up with my regular OB, and they were like, oh, okay, well, we can squeeze you in. And I just remember feeling like off put about the whole like,
they had to fit you in.
Yeah. And like they never told me, they didn't do stitches. It was glue. It was glue.
Yeah.
Oh.
But I didn't even know that. I had no idea. I was like, do I peel that off in like a week? Like what? I had no idea. They basically said, don't submerge yourself in water and don't scrub with a loofah.
And your shoulders.
Well, my
And
C-section
my
wasn't
shoulders might
stitches. It was glue.
That's terrifying.
I had no
They
idea.
glued you
I
back
don't want to
together.
think about it.
And the funny thing is like, I think I remember like, because they didn't even say anything, like they looked at it when I scheduled that follow-up, they looked at it. I think it was a week and a half later I went in, or 2 weeks, something like that. And they were like, oh, okay. Still didn't tell me anything about what would happen. They were like, oh, it'll work itself out. Sure enough, I went to like a lake weekend or something. I had a big weekend planned with my entire college girlfriend group, our families, everybody. And I just remember like sweating so bad that it just like one of them just peeled off. And I still thought it was unhealed because of the look of the glue. No, it turns out it was like completely healed and just like a small little scar at that point. I was like, oh, that would have been nice for somebody to share. But like, it's okay if it comes off and it's not
just
that
gonna
it's like
pop
still
open.
Like,
God. I think there's a very difference between like a surgery you're paying for at a hospital
Very true.
versus like this unplanned maternal emergency like specifically maternal health.
The
like
maternal
it's
health
just
piece, I think, is a critical component.
so uncaring in our country.
it is.
We have the highest maternal fetal rate or death rate in this country.
Not the highest, but it's higher than it should be.
The highest in the developed nations.
Yeah.
Out of all the developed nations, the U.S. has the highest
Maternal
fatality rate.
Well, and I think that's why it's so important that we just advocate for increased awareness and like understanding and like talk about this. Like, because I never knew any of this.
Yeah.
And you guys are close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you didn't tell her about any of this going on
I
until
didn't
like
know
after.
like, the details of the drama until the day, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew some, like the highlight.
I kept the whole thing to myself.
Yeah.
It wasn't until like, I think the day after that I actually reached out to a few friends and said like, hey, like this. But then you also feel like this is, I don't, this may be the unpopular opinion, is that like the day after I had surgery, I almost felt this sense of guilt in reaching out to my friends to tell them what had happened because I wasn't looking for sympathy at the time. Like, I just guess I was like, I don't know. Like,
You need empathy.
kind of like just to be like, you're normal.
Well, I think
Because
you're processing
I felt
what happened.
so unnormal at the time that like there was no answers, there was no process, there was no aftercare. Like I just didn't know where I stood, and like it was just me and my husband at that point, and that knew about this, and my boss. But like my boss knew it from a work standpoint, not from like a
personal standpoint.
not from like I'm going to reach out to her on a Saturday afternoon and say like, hey, I need this kind of support. But I just almost like the first time that I actually told somebody it happened, I then felt uncomfortable about it because I felt like I was like, am I looking for sympathy? Am I looking for somebody to be like, are you okay? But I was like, I felt the need to just tell somebody so that it wasn't just my secret anymore.
Yeah.
And almost like get it off
To make
my
it
chest.
not a secret.
Right. Because it was this whole thing. And my poor husband had like no idea what was like how, he was amazing the entire week. He did everything I could have expected and then some. And like, he was my number one that week and with me like the whole time. But also who was there to support him?
Right.
So like, I'm thinking about myself and I'm like, not even thinking like, oh gosh, like it wasn't until like down the road, I was like, wow, I kind of left him out to dry. And I felt almost even more guilty about it. But we were both like, this is so new. And so untalked about. Nobody says anything about this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming people constantly ask you, like, when are you guys going to have a baby? Or when are you going to get pregnant? And like,
I mean, when you're 38 and getting married, that's like the biggest question you get is it's like, because it immediately kind of puts you on that time clock. And my husband and I always had a great view on family. Like it was kind of like if we tried. And if it happened, we would be
happy about it. But if it didn't happen, we would be fine with it too because of my age. And we weren't, newer to being married, and we got married a little later. And, that was like a popular, and I know that it was weighing on our parents too, like a whole nother, rabbit hole I could go down right
Yeah, we
there.
have a whole episode on child-free by choice.
Yeah.
We have a whole episode on being child-free by choice. And like some of it feels like if you were on the fence about having kids and you had this horrific experience, I'd be like, what would pregnancy be like? What would that be like? Absolutely not. Like I probably would have been like, nope, I'm good.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way we feel better about making that decision now after knowing like what went on and how both of us felt when all of that went on, and like how I was after the fact, and we feel, I never want that's not the right choice for everybody.
Yeah.
But for us, it was the choice that we needed to make. And for now, like we are going to be happy just being the two of us. And if that were to change, we could talk about it. And we've never taken that off the table, but that's what felt right after that being our experience.
I know that these are very different experiences, but I can relate to what you're saying in the fact that that's why we have one child and no more, because I had such a traumatic birth experience. I was, very blessed in terms of conceiving. The pregnancy was relatively smooth, right? But the birth and delivery and the immediate after was very traumatizing for me. And it was one of those things where it's like, now I know at least one way that it can go wrong. Well, many ways that it can go wrong. And there's so many other possibilities that for us and for me, it wasn't worth risking my health to potentially have another baby, and then all the potential complications that can come, right? And so it was very much, that was the deciding factor for me. And my husband was very supportive. He was like, obviously it's your body, right? You're the one who has to live with it. And then what he went through, right? I still think about to this day what he went through while I was crashing, right?
Like
and
fighting for your life.
Was in NICU and like all these things. And then there was nobody for my husband except my parents were there, right? And it's so sad to think, right? Like we don't get enough support, but I also very much recognize that the partners don't get enough support around any of these issues, right? Before having a baby, after having a baby, like it's just not enough.
When I think about it in terms of the legislation that's going on here in North Carolina right now, they are trying to do an abortion ban here in North Carolina. And what you had was an abortion, right? That surgery was an abortion where they terminated a pregnancy, non-viable pregnancy, but essentially terminated a pregnancy. And with the bans they're trying to have, and some that have happened in Texas at this point, you would have literally had to be septic before they could have gone in for surgery and done that with where they're at.
And like I think about where I was that night and just like the amount of pain and what was going through my head. And I can't imagine it. Like once I finally intervened, I can't imagine it. Like had I not, how bad it could have gotten. Like it just, I was sitting there, and it's funny, I'm sitting here on this podcast with my like knees tucked up, but it was even worse. Like I was like hugging my knees and just like, because it was relentless. Like there's no relief until that is like completely out of your body. So like, Nicohle, to your point, like that is horrible, because like knowing what I experienced, and they caught mine, because I was vocal and went in, we caught mine when I was just like newly bleeding internally from the rupture.
Right.
But can you imagine having to sit there as a woman and just be like,
for hours,
for time, just hours. I mean, I went all day sitting there like that, and mine was newly ruptured. That could be days.
Yeah, it could be days. And the doctors
there's not enough science behind
doctors are so fearful of being prosecuted because they're prosecuting doctors in Texas right now.
Yeah.
For this.
Yeah.
My work actually added as part of our benefits funds that if you live in one of those states, they'll pay for your travel to go to another state to get the care that you need.
It just blows my mind that has to even be something worth talking about, that like women's health is so poor in this country that we're even talking about the fact that like jobs are adding benefits to fly you out of the state you live in. Could you imagine flying in that much pain?
No. I could barely make the drive.
Right.
And then I had to sit there by myself because at one point they had too many people. So they had to like, all guests had to leave, or like people.
Your husband had to leave.
So my husband
room?
had to go sit out in the car. He couldn't even be in the ER.
Because of COVID?
It was
after.
It was after. There was not even a mask mandate at that point. Like I would have
been like, absolutely fucking not. He's not leaving this room. I would have been like, you can send one of your people out and he needs to be here.
Yeah.
So can you imagine
you were sharing a room? Were you sharing a room?
I wasn't sharing a room, but it was like curtain style.
That's basically sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Cops everywhere because I think the gentleman next to me was actually in it.
Because again, this was the ER.
Like pretty well like rush. But it just like you took away my one support system. I'm sitting here in pain. And can you imagine if a woman had to like sit there all night until she went into septic by herself? Like who would have even caught that around me?
Yeah.
Nobody knew me in that waiting room. They didn't know me from Adam. Like they didn't.
Well,
and they also
like,
didn't know what was going on with
It's not like you were taken to like the OB floor, right? Like you weren't taken to the maternal floor to like be treated for pregnancy loss. You were in the ER treated as like any Joe Schmo who walked in for any other condition. Like when this is such a like personal like condition you're going through, like you're also
in a very specific medical condition that requires very specific knowledge of
and not
how
even that, the
to
emotional
address
aspect
it,
of like you're losing a pregnancy here. So there's also that emotional aspect of like you were trying, you got pregnant, and then it like you lost it in that manner.
Yeah. And that was like something that I didn't even acknowledge at the time because I just
couldn't.
I was on like, I guess, fight or flight. Like, get this over with. Like, what do I have to do to make myself feel right again, feel whole again?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I thought because nobody talked about it is the minute this thing's out of me, you know, I have to say thing because it's literally a ruptured part of my body at that point that doesn't feel like anything else because it's so painful. It's been so traumatic over a whole week is that I was so done that it just like.
Yeah. So did you seek therapy afterwards to talk about this, or do you have a therapist in which you
I didn't at all. I went about, like, told some friends, finally, like, listening to Jenny tell me, like, you're just in it for the time. It could take this many months. It could take this many months. And I just kind of stayed the course on my own, kind of faded away talking about it and just kind of moved on with life. I even took a big trip for work and, 3 months after the fact. And I looking back, don't know if that was the best decision because I was definitely like, I had some ups and downs of being on that trip. Mm-hmm. But no, I actually like, it's funny that I just started therapy a couple months ago, but this hasn't even been a topic. Like she knows that it happened and it's in my past.
She's working up to that.
You know, I think
there's to that.
Yeah, I think there's like other things that we're working through that, that landed me there to begin with. But I think that like we'll get there eventually. But, I'm not afraid to now say it out loud that this happened because I want to change how people look at it.
Yeah.
People need to be vocal. People need to have a support system outside of medical because it wasn't available to me. Heck, I didn't even know I was going to feel like I did after the fact. So, and even just in like finding a therapist for like what the reasons I have one now, the amount of time it even took me to find somebody that was available. And it took somebody advocating for me. Thank you, Rooms, for being the best person.
Jenny's like your best advocate in all situations.
I mean, way sooner than she was, and I kept on telling her,
don't we all
didn't do it? So finally,
Therapy's
I talked.
A beautiful thing.
I talked to my therapist, and I was like, "She submitted this, but she's on a waiting list. I need you to move her up."
Yeah. She went to your therapist.
I do.
Like you're the one that convinced me to go to therapy. Like she's the therapy queen over here. She's like, go, go, go.
We should do an episode.
But it really just like. Without somebody actually telling a therapist how badly I needed to see somebody, I would have never gotten in anywhere. So like that was also another
so bad.
It just like everything. And then, tonight is probably the first time I've like looked back on it and talked about it in quite some time or like been as open about it.
And
but
live.
Like and live.
Big step.
I'm sorry. It needs to it needs to change for people like me, like who had no idea. That were alone in it, who didn't know what the next steps were. Nobody was going to tell you. You just kind of like, because you need to build your own support system.
Yeah.
Basically, in order to get through
something
that's the
whole
that.
reason we have this podcast is to build your own tribe, to have like women who you can reach out to and have a community because it's not so
and to
readily
have those tough conversations.
Yeah, it's not so readily available, especially in this world we live in now where people move across country and aren't with family all the time or like living in their own kind of like reality.
Yeah. And I think that also too, like,
it's okay to make your own decision after it about how you want your future to look. Like it doesn't need to be one way or the other. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I learned coming out of this is that like that decision afterwards is like my husband and I, we made it for us. Like finally we were doing what was like what we wanted after learning what the process could have looked like.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, it could have ended very differently. We could, I'm what, 5, 6, 7 months out, like I could actually be pregnant at this point. But I think that like, you know, some people have very different endings from things. And I think that's important to acknowledge too, is that it's okay after one of these to make the decision that you want to make about your future. And I think that's also a very untalked about thing is like women sometimes feel like, oh, well, I miscarried. I've got to fix it maybe by getting pregnant again. But it's also okay to acknowledge that that might not be the right path for you.
Yeah.
And I think that that actually was harder for me to admit afterwards too, because I was like, how are people going to look at me?
Yeah.
Like are people going to be okay with my decision? And I was worried about being judged for all the things that I felt and went through at the time that I was going through all of this. You know, finding out I was pregnant and then bleeding, but not necessarily being excited because I was like, what is happening? We didn't have any time to be feel
there was
excited.
No opportunity to be excited for you. Yeah.
So like it was just, you know, it was scared because we got a positive. So you're kind of like, oh gosh, it's your first time. Are you excited? Are you scared? Are you like, what is happening?
And you're like, oh, we were on the fence and now it's like, guess we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Like,
and like I said, we would have been happy no matter what, but it just like, I want to express to everybody, it's okay to feel whatever you need to feel in that minute. And nobody can tell you otherwise.
And we as women are so conditioned to feel the way that society wants us to feel that we like, I just think about how many times you apologized in this episode of like, I'm sorry about that. Like, we're so conditioned to say sorry for everything that like, it's okay to own how we're feeling no matter what.
And it's okay to not be sorry.
Yeah. We're going to start the Not Sorry podcast to go.
Yeah. Not sorry. That'd be a fun.
We are not sorry. I can list off all the things I'm not sorry about.
Yeah.
We so appreciate you coming and talking about this because I genuinely believe that it is so important for people to have these conversations, to know the things that you've shared, to know the possibilities that are out there, to know the questions right to ask. And again, the bottom line is to advocate for yourself, right? And to find those core people around you that are going to help you through whatever it is, right? To help advocate for you, to help support you, to be that shoulder, to just be a sounding board, right? All the things are so important.
I agree. And I just, you know, like, thank you guys so much for having me and allowing this topic to happen. Like, I didn't actually know that I needed this topic to happen, but just like giving women a voice and like giving me the voice to say, like, it's okay. Like, you know, and no matter what you choose and how it ends up, like it's okay.
Yeah. And sometimes sharing your story is what really helps you like heal. And I want to invite like all of our listeners to follow us on social media and share your stories if you've had miscarriages or any sort of trauma in
things that you wish that you had known, that someone had told you, a doctor had told you, anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can follow us at Shepack Unleashed. And we're going to be posting this on all the socials so that you guys can share your stories along with our community.
Thank you for listening tonight and being a part of our tribe.
This is Jenny, Nicohle, Tania, and our very special guest, Jenna, signing off. Stay wild and fierce.